Welcome back to another episode of Hawksy Fishing. Today I'm going to be running through my cod gear, going through the outfits I'm using, whether it's for general cod fishing, throwing bigger swim baits at them, or even fly fishing for cod, as well as the lures that I'm using in different situations, the flies that I've picked out. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and let's get stuck into it. To start things off, I'm going to be looking at what I call my general cod outfits. For reels on those, I use Daiwa Tortulas. These are actually an older model, so they only came in the 100 size back then, and I run them in 3 different gear ratios. I've got the 5.5, a 6.2 and a 7.1, and I pick out which reel is going to suit the technique I'll be fishing with that rod for that day. All 3 of them are loaded up with P3 Tasline that breaks at around 50 pound. And the leaders I run range between 30 and 60 pound. If I think I'm going to be fishing heavy structure or targeting slightly larger fish, I'll go up towards the 60 pound end of things. Open water, smaller fish or smaller lures, I'll bump it down a little bit to that 30 pound sort of size. The first rod that I'm going to be talking to you about is a Majorcraft Volkey. I got this as a bit of an all-rounder. These days I actually use something slightly heavier as an all-rounder and use this for those smaller systems or throwing smaller lures. It's 6'9" long and rated 12 to 20 pound. It says it caps out at 28 grams for the cast weight, but I've cast up to 45 on it. You just have to slow things down a little bit. As I said before, this rod here used to be my all-rounder. These days I use it in those smaller waterways, throwing smaller lures or targeting some slightly smaller fish. Just makes the fight a bit more fun, and it's a lot easier to control the smaller lures with a rod that's a bit lighter as well. The next rod I'm going to be talking about is a Daiwa TD Battler Thunderbolt. This is incredibly similar to the Majorcraft Volkey with basically identical specs. I tend to use this rod more so for bass and yellow belly, but everything I said about the Volkey applies to this as well. The main reason I choose the Volkey over this for that smaller waterway cod fishing is it tends to be fairly rough on your gear, and I'd also rather save this for situations where that extra sensitivity really comes in handy. Next up is my Millerod's Cod Freak. I originally bought this to have the ability to throw some slightly larger baits as I started moving to those bigger waterways. The Volkey was a little bit limited in that capacity. It's 6'6" long and rated to cast 30 to 80 grams. But I've been pleasantly surprised with how well it goes at the bottom of that cast weight and even below it a little bit. As a result of its ability to cast a really broad range of baits, this has really come into its own as my all-rounder. The only time I don't pick this up is when I'm planning to use baits that are under 20 grams quite regularly throughout a session. Otherwise, this is the one that's going to get a run for me. Next up, we have my swim bait outfit. I only have the one rod for swim baits currently, although I do have plans to expand that a little bit in the future. The rod itself is a Daiwa Tortula 76H. These cap out at around 150 grams for the cast weight. The reason I went with this was I felt that the 150 gram max cast weight covered all those entry level baits that I was looking at throwing to get into throwing swim baits. As I've sort of got into it a bit more, I've started wanting to throw bigger baits and have a couple of different outfits specified for different size baits in different areas. But for a starting rod, this has done a fantastic job for me. Moving on to the fly gear now. The rod that I use fly fishing for cod is a Sage Bass 2 largemouth. This one's had a custom carbon grip put on it by Sven from Dust Custom Rods. This rod here was designed by Sage for accurately delivering bulky flies to structure. It's 7'11" long, so it's nice and short to keep under the canopy in any of those overgrown rivers and deliver accurate casts into the snags. I was fortunate enough to pick up this rod secondhand from Peter Morse, already set up as a combo, so I didn't have to worry about matching the line to the rod or anything too much. It had already been done for me. I haven't actually managed to hook a cod on this yet, and it is one of my big goals for the upcoming season. For flies, I'm keeping things really basic and simple. For topwater flies, I've got this articulated shank double barrel popper head fly from BWC Flies. The articulated shank lets that hook sit nice and low under the water there. It means that when the cod goes to eat it, it's actually going to suck the fly down rather than just push it out of the way. And then for subsurface, I've got these big Donnie Brascos here, again from BWC Flies, in a couple of colours. I decided to start things off nice and simple with just a couple of options to work out what works where and really sort of expand that collection as I go and see a need for different flies. For lures for cod, I really recommend doing the same thing as I'm doing with the flies if you're just getting into it. Picking out a handful of known lures and getting to know them, getting the feel for them and working out what else you need to add to the collection to suit you. I'm just going to run through a few of the lures that I use most regularly and what I use them for. Starting things off with the bib divers, I've got a Old Mate Lures and an Arashi Deep 25. These guys here are usually the first thing I'll break out when I'm fishing subsurface. They bump over logs and rocks and that sort of thing really well and elicit more of a reaction bite from the fish. You can move them a lot quicker than some of your other techniques and cover a fair bit more water, which is why I like to start off with them. Next up we have spinnerbaits. These here are both Bassmans. This one's just the regular Codman and this is the Codman 4x4. These I use when I'm not getting much action on the diving hard bodies to get in tight, in around snags, right down in their country and move them nice and slow and keep them in their face a bit more. I found when the bite's tough, these can really elicit a strike out of some of those more shut down fish. Generally I like to fish them with the paddle tail style trailer on them like this 4x4's got. I don't actually have any with the trailer left on them in the Codmans at the moment, but I will be grabbing some more and adding a trailer to this one here as well. Next up we have surface lures. We've got here a Jackal Pompadour and a Mud-Eye Lures Rattlesnake. These guys here, as you can see, are very, very different lures. The Jackal Pompadour is one of my absolute go-tos for those small to medium-sized waterways, but they do have a reputation for working just about everywhere. One thing I'll say about these guys is definitely upgrade your hooks and rings on them. It does make them sit a little bit lower in the water, but I haven't noticed any real adverse effect to the action on them. The Mud-Eye Rattlesnake sits at a really nice size for me. It puts out a lot of noise and disturbance to bring fish up and have a look at them from a bit deeper water or get the interest of those larger fish. But it's still light enough that I can cast it on my cod freak and use it in some of those smaller waterways as well. Finally for lures we have swim baits. This one here is a Jackal Gantia. This is one of the new models where you don't actually have to upgrade trebles. They come ready to go out of the pack for cod. These have got a really nice swimming action on them. I tend to use them more so on rivers where I'm going to be throwing around a bit more structure. Because they've got a tighter swimming action than a glide bait, I don't have to worry as much about them gliding into a snag or anything silly like that. And they're large enough to still have quite a bit of draw power to them. Now onto the bigger baits for throwing in impoundments. This here is a Megabass Magdraft 8-inch and a Jackal Gigantro. The reason this is an 8-inch rather than a 10 is because of my rod. If my rod could cast the 10-inch Magdrafts, I'd definitely be using those. The Magdrafts I tend to use in a similar fashion to what I was talking about with the diving hard bodies in rivers. Something that you move a little bit quicker and trying to elicit more of a reaction bite out of the fish. If I want to move it slow and keep it in their face a bit more, that's where the Jackal Gigantro comes in. These swim at a nice slow speed and you keep it in the fish's face for a little bit longer. When I was looking for some background footage for this video, I actually found some clips from a day's fishing Lake Eildon with Mark Whitford with the Jackal Gigantro. I haven't edited them up and put them on YouTube yet, so they'll be up later this week. Alright guys, that brings us to the end of my cod gear walkthrough. If you've got any questions, queries, or anything else you want to see me do a walkthrough of, drop a comment down below. Make sure you like the video and subscribe to my channel, and I'll catch you next time.